Thank you, Nick, and a warm welcome to everybody. It's really exciting that so many people are joining us for these two webinars. I thought I'd just start by saying just a few words about how the book and therefore these webinars came about. Since I became involved in the ISPS in 1991, I really got to know quite a lot of really exciting developments in the Nordic countries. But for today's purposes, I just want to mention, to begin with, the need-adapted approach to psychosis that started by Professor Yrjö Alonen and his colleagues in Turku in southwest Finland. Like myself, Alonen is a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, and he developed a service that was psychotherapeutic at its heart. And in later stages, he centrally involved families. And he found in his research that outcomes were really good and somewhat comparable to those found in open dialogue. And it was Jukka Aaltonen, who was part of Alonen's group, who went up to Western Lapland and supervised the team there. And for many years supported its excellent in-house training that's, I think, so crucial to the outcomes. Now, I had the opportunity to introduce need-adapted the approach in the early intervention and psychosis service I was working in the UK. And as far as I got, I found it really influential. It was so impressed me, this approach. And with the findings that were coming out of the open dialogue research, that I felt I couldn't retire without there being a book on open dialogue for psychosis in the ISPS series that I was involved in. So with this in mind, my determination there should be a book, I was put in touch with Nick Putman, who with all his expertise, as a clinician, as a trainer and a teacher of open dialogue internationally, he agreed to join me, and we got to work in co-editing the book and in putting on these seminars. So I really want to end by thanking Nick for his participation and all the really hard work he's put into the book and into preparing for this webinar today.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's been quite a journey we've been on together with this book, longer than we both imagined, partly to do with my busyness generally and how much work it takes to try and develop this approach in the UK internationally. But I'm delighted that we got there. And yes, so in terms of just very briefly to sort of introduce myself before I go on to introduce, or we go on to introduce the book a little bit more. Seem to be muted. My background is that I originally was working in the health service in the UK as a psychologist, but found many of the kind of aspects of the system and the profession of psychology to be quite limited. So I ended up sort of leaving my career as a psychologist, found my way to the Philadelphia Association in London, which was established by R.D. Laing in 1965 in order to open up a therapeutic community in the East End of London to try and create an alternative to the system. And Laing was a very important inspiration to me in my sort of early undergraduate days in psychology, and worked for about 8 or 9 years in therapeutic communities, but then felt very motivated to try and bring the values from those therapeutic communities into the mainstream. And I was looking for an approach that would, John, just to let you know that we're keeping videos off. So if you could turn your video off, John, that would be great. Thank you. So yeah, wanting to bring those values into the mainstream and looking for a way to do that. And I think it was about 11 years ago, a good friend of mine, Volkmar Aderhold, who some of you may know, encouraged me to visit Lapland. And when I arrived there, I felt very at home, and I felt that I'd found the answers to the questions about how do we bring these kinds of values into the mainstream. And that's why I've been working very hard for 10 years to do just that. And the book is kind of a culmination, I suppose, of that 10 years. But also, I would say it's an opportunity to capture what's been happening, particularly in the last 10 years, as the interest in the approach has grown, and the approach is now being developed in as many as 30 countries. So I will now share my screen with you. We've got a couple of slides to share with you, just to start to introduce the book. So this is a new book on open dialogue and psychosis. It was published on the 30th of July as part of the ISPS book series. I think there's probably 30 to 40 titles now, or maybe even more in the book series. And you would have seen in the email that there's a link to look at those and buy those if you're interested in some of the other books. We've got a virtual bookstore. Edited by Brian and myself, the book contains 47 chapters written by 77 authors from 11 different countries. So one of the reasons why it's taken time is that it's a lot, it's been a lot of work to try to sort of include all of these authors working in different countries, some of whom are writing not in their first language, in English, and so and to sort of make it cohere into 6 different sections, which I'll introduce now. So these are the 6 different sections. I'm going to mention the first 3, and then Brian's going to speak to the last 3. So the first 3 is really just to introduce the approach. So I've written an introductory chapter, which is going to largely be reflected in the presentation, the keynote presentation I'm about to give now. It's to introduce the 7 principles and some of the background. But then there's 2 chapters which go more detail into the background and also the current thinking. So the second chapter is written by Birgitta Alakari in conjunction with Jaakko Seikkilä. Birgitta was the chief psychiatrist in Western Lapland and sadly passed away recently. Jaakko will be with us today for the research workshop and also tomorrow to give the other keynote presentation. And then Jaakko's written a chapter on what's come to be very important to him in working with people having psychotic experiences. And that will be largely reflected, that chapter, in the presentation he's going to give tomorrow. In the second section, we've got, I think it's 8 different accounts of work with families, with networks. I think 5 of them are co-written by family members, so they're very polyphonic. I don't have time to go through all of them, but hopefully it gives us sort of a rich sense of the kinds of processes that become possible in this approach. And then section 3 is about training. It felt important to start to address issues related to training, to give some of the details of what training programs involve and the different training programs. And I'm going to be speaking about those, or some of those trainings, mostly in a workshop this afternoon. And some of the participants from those trainings and the other trainers are going to be involved in that workshop as well. And as well as the trainings I've been involved in, there's some other chapters as well. There's been adaptations of the training in different settings. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Nick. For section 4, in Western Lapland, of course, the whole service has been structured in order to be able to apply open dialogue, but that's not been possible elsewhere in the world. So section 4 is really about how people have managed to introduce open dialogue or aspects of open dialogue in their different contexts in different countries. And so you could say in Western Lapland, it's sort of top down in a way, or bottom up, but in other countries, it's very much been bottom up, I think, to some extent. And I'm impressed with how much open dialogue is happening in Germany from a bottom up approach at the moment. That's described. Developments in Italy, in open dialogue, sorry, in early intervention in the UK, Two nice accounts from the United States, an important chapter on whether people who migrate into Sweden, in this case, migrants have been able to make use of open dialogue. That's a nice chapter. The introduction of peer workers, and then two chapters at the end on introducing open dialogue in hospital settings, including a chapter in a forensic unit with a locked ward. So surprising places, but that's section 4. And then just to remind you that open dialogue is a platform. It doesn't claim to be a complete thing in itself that will work with all aspects of the problems that people with psychosis experience. So section 5 is how, in ways in which open dialogue has integrated with or complements other approaches. And so thinking about, and also looking at overlaps in the theory of open dialogue with other approaches such as systemic family therapy and so on. So systemic family therapy, CBT, I wrote about the possible integration of aspects with psychoanalysis. Nick wrote about therapeutic communities, multi-family therapy, and how Helsinki has adapted aspects of open dialogue to integrate with other approaches, and the arts therapies is represented by a chapter on music therapy. And of course, we could have had many other aspects too. And the last section is the research section, which I pulled together, which there's a lot of research going on around the world, both qualitative and quantitative. And this is going to be terribly important in persuading others that open dialogue can be as effective in other settings as it has been in Western Lapland. So in that section, we go in some detail to the Finnish research that's presented, and then details of some trials that are ongoing, very important trials in the UK and in Italy, and in other places where qualitative and quantitative work has been going on, including some ideas about what are the crucial ingredients of open dialogue, and how do they affect the mind of people suffering for experiencing psychosis? How does it alter for the better the sense of self? So that's the, yeah. Then we have an epilogue, a prologue and epilogue, and that's the book.
So in terms of the workshops, we basically, tried to structure the workshops around these different aspects, sections 2 to 6. There are different choices kind of related to those. Most of you who already signed up for a workshop, those of you that haven't will have to sort that out during a break and manually move you into the workshop that you want to be in. So please have a look and make sure, if you haven't already signed up, that you know which one you want to be in today. Okay, so Brian, I think you can turn off your video now, if that's all that you have to say, and I will carry on with the presentation for today. Okay. So the idea is that I'm going to give a brief introduction to open dialogue, bringing in a few of my own sort of personal reflections, but mostly just sort of introducing the principles and some of the other things that I've mentioned in my introductory chapter. Sometimes when I do the presentation on open dialogue, I have a subtitle, How Do We Want to Live? And it sounds quite general, but there's a reason for it. And there's a few points here that kind of speak to what I'm getting at by this question. What we've seen with industrial and post-industrial society is that there's been an erosion of traditional community and a move towards greater individualization. So, this reflects kind of society as a whole. This in turn has led to greater reliance on services and on the expertise of professionals, as well as the proliferation of specialized services. Now, of course, at heart, open dialogue is a way of organizing a mental health service in order to meet the needs of those served. But at the same time, it challenges the modern trends outlined above through the inclusion of the family or social network, who are viewed as a resource, the non-expert position of professionals, and less emphasis on diagnosis and specialized services. So the open dialogue approach challenges us to think about whether we want to bring back conversations about mental health to the community. And that's why I include, that broader question, because I think the more you get involved in this approach, you can't avoid questions like that. So some preliminary considerations. Well, the start of the development of the open dialogue approach can be traced back to the early 1980s in Western Lapland. But it was not until 1995 that the term open dialogue was first used to describe the 7 principles. And these principles emerged from research. Now, the word open in open dialogue doesn't refer to dialogue because dialogue is naturally inclusive. The word open refers to the fact that we can welcome many people to these meetings. There's an open idea about who can come from the network. So what this tells us, if there was almost 15 years before they arrived at defining the principles in this way, is that they take their time in Western Lapland, time to develop and refine their approach. And as a result of continual reflection, and that carries on to this day. But in most other places, there seems to be pressure to develop the approach quickly and prove its worth quickly. This is quite a modern phenomenon, and I'm quite concerned about this. Another consideration is that open dialogue is not a specialized approach for psychosis, as some people think, but it's actually an approach to all people affected by mental health challenges. Perhaps because most of the research focuses on psychosis, people might think that it is a specialized approach, but it's not. At the same time, we might ask ourselves, is there something about the approach that seems particularly well suited to individuals and networks affected by such experiences? The book we've published, as I've mentioned, is part of the ISPS book series, and therefore the focus is on people having psychotic experiences. And it's important for me to say that some people prefer to use terms other than psychosis, such as extreme states, hearing voices, spiritual crisis. And this is very much respected within the open dialogue approach, where we aim to follow the language of the networks we work with. And it's actually possible in this approach that a network could be involved with a team working in this way over a long period of time, and there would never be any conversation about diagnosis. And that, for me, is one of the powerful aspects of the approach. So there are 2 key aspects to open dialogue, and the 7 principles fall under these 2 aspects. It's both a way of organizing services and a way of being with people in the network meetings and in other aspects of the service. Now, as I'll go on to say more about as I go through my presentation, it's proving difficult to fully realize all these 7 principles in other services. Some people have had more success than others. It's also proving very difficult to transform an entire mental health service. So we can say there are not really many, if any, examples of a service that's been completely transformed. And I certainly look forward to the day when that happens. You can see the 7 principles there, which I'm going to go through one at a time now. But those arrows there in both directions symbolize that all of these 7 principles interrelate with each other and depend on each other in order to make the service work. So the first of the 7 principles is immediate help. A phone call is the most common way to contact the mental health service in Western Lapland. Anyone can call. It could be the person at the centre of concern. It could be a family member, a school nurse, a social worker, a friend, and a written referral is not needed. So essentially what they're trying to do is create a ready access to their services. There's not like a triage system that people have to go through in order to arrive at the right place. You're always at the right place. That's their attitude. And there's always a crisis in the network if someone has taken the trouble to contact the service, so that everyone is taken seriously. If needed, the first meeting is arranged within 24 hours. It's common sense that we should get to people in a timely way. Waiting lists that can be very long in some services are not a feature of the Western Lapland service. And to some extent, that might be because they're better resourced, but I think it's also because of the effectiveness and efficiency of the way they run their service. I think there's a good deal of common sense in the approach when you see the 7 principles. Many of you might think that, as do I, but I think when we come to think more about the practice and the training, there's also a good deal of skill in the facilitation of the processes involved. The aim with responding quickly, one of the main aims, is to try to integrate the network meetings, which is the main forum for the work that's done, not the only forum, but I would say the main forum, to integrate these meetings with the families or network's everyday life as soon as possible, in the hope that hospitalization can be avoided. And it's also been the case that they have found in Western Lapland that in the early stages of crisis, it seems easier to speak about certain matters, and in particular psychotic experiences, and to engage the social network, who are already kind of very activated at a time of crisis. And that's the time where we have a better chance of involving anyone. Now, in terms of the initial call that happens, there will be a conversation about who should be invited to the first meeting that will probably happen within 24 hours. And depending on who you're talking to, you may not be speaking to the person that's experiencing the extreme crisis. And if that is the case, then it's going to be important to me to try and include the voice of that person in the decision-making about who should be invited to the first meeting. The configuration of the network in the network meetings can change at any point in the process. So once we're there for the first meeting, we might have ideas about inviting someone else, so we can take it step by step. It's also the case that I should say that if the person who's identified as being at the centre of concern doesn't want to participate in a meeting, the meeting could still take place. And that's because the teams in Lapland, their attitude is basically that everyone is suffering. So if you like, they are serving everyone. And if there are concerned relatives, they'll go to meet with those relatives. If the person who's at the centre of concern is in the same house, which is an advantage we have when meeting in the family home, then we could say to that person, I would want to say to that person, we're meeting downstairs because your family is concerned. Please feel free to join us at any point if you'd like to. And that can happen in any meeting. They can join at any time. Rolf, just to let you know, we're inviting people to turn off their videos during the presentation. So if you could turn off your video, we'll see you again later. Thank you. Okay. The next principle, the social network perspective. The family or social network are invited to attend the meetings from the very beginning. This is naturally the way that they work. Of course, if there's a person who's contacting the services says, I don't want my network involved, then that will be respected and they'll be worked with one-to-one, most probably. There's an open idea, as I've already said, of who can be in this network. It could include other professionals who are already involved, perhaps colleagues, employers, neighbours, or friends. In my experience, it's most often family members, maybe a friend, or maybe a professional who's already involved. They do a very good job in Lapland of collaborating with other public mental health care, or public agencies of different kinds, not just mental health. And they talk about working together, not side by side. Crucially, the family are seen as a network, the family or network are seen as a resource, not an object of treatment, as would have been the case in more traditional systemic family therapy that some of the early pioneers of open dialogue were trained in. And I want to sort of extend this a little bit more, because I think one of the tricky things that can happen when families are more included in services is that the question of blame comes up, and Brian might say more about that later on, because he's written an article about that. But I think we need to find a way of including everyone without anyone being blamed, because if we can't do that, we don't really have a chance of working with people, of attending to the suffering of everyone, because it almost always becomes about everyone's suffering and not just about one person's suffering. We can say that the problem is truly dissolved if everyone who originally defined it as a problem no longer think of it as such. So this is the social constructionist aspect of open dialogue. It's a much more powerful way of working if we include every voice and everyone comes to feel that the crisis is past, and yes, there may be ongoing challenges, but that they can continue to work on those together. And the team, again, common sense, the team can meet separately with different family and network members when joint meetings are not possible. For instance, when there's been experiences of violence or abuse within the family or network. Principle number 3, flexibility and mobility. The flexibility is about adapting the response to the specific and changing needs of each person, family, or network, using the most suitable methods or services. So this harks back to what Brian was talking about, the need adapted treatment, which is one of the roots of open dialogue, that we need to try and fit the service to the person rather than the person to the service. And I should say in that, as I've already hinted at, that network meetings, while they're the main forum, there can be a whole variety of different aspects to the services offered, and there's no limit to what can be included in an open dialogue service. So in that sense, it's more like an umbrella under which many different approaches can live. Network meetings can be arranged as often as needed. This is another aspect to the flexibility. And we arrange the next meeting at the end of the current one, and they have flexible schedules that enable them to do that. Meetings take place in the best setting for network members, and quite possibly in the family home. There are a number of advantages to meeting in the family home. I have a preference for it, I think. You get to know the family in their context, in their natural habitat. I think there's an invitation to be more humble in our role as professionals if we're going into someone else's home. And also the advantage of people come and go during the meeting, they can still participate in some of the meeting. Whereas if the family are coming to a clinic, that wouldn't be possible. But if a family prefers to meet in a clinic, then that's what will be arranged. Responsibility is the 4th principle. Whoever is first contacted at the service is responsible for arranging the first meeting, in which decisions about how and where to continue the work are made. So it's kind of dangerous to pick up the phone in the service in Western Lapland, because if you do, you've got work to do. You've got to find that team and make sure they're ready to meet with the family. Responsibility is shared between team members for all important concerns being discussed. So the teamwork is really at the heart of this approach. And there's no reference to another authority, which means the teams are trusted to do their work. There's not a strong hierarchy in the service in Western Lapland. The teams have been well trained, as Brian already mentioned, and that would be part of that trust. More broadly, I think team members take responsibility for what they share in the meetings and the ways in which this may affect others. We try to be non-defensive, we try to be human, with a willingness to be changed by the experience. Principle number 5 is psychological continuity, and that's to say that the same team should be in charge of the whole process, regardless of where the work is taking place. They can work across inpatient and outpatient settings. which is, is quite radical in terms of how things tend to be very structured and delineated elsewhere. The social network is invited to participate throughout the process as well. The team can continue to meet with the network for as long as needed. In Lapland, they have the resources for that. And whilst that might seem like an excessive use of resources, I think if we really do the job well at the time of first crisis, as we know from the outcomes from Lapland, which you can hear more about in the research workshops, that the relapse rates are lower, the long-term prospects are better. So it could be an efficient way of working, a cost-effective way of working even. If there is another crisis or need for services at some time in the future, the same team will work with the network if they are available. They have better staff retention, I think, in Lapland than they do in many other places. In London, people are often moving between trusts, for instance, and they're finding this principle quite hard to maintain. I've also heard that in Germany, because of shift work and the resources they have, they find this principle very difficult. And so they've had to have like a team of 4 people, and they'll say that any 2 people from the team will be in one meeting, and they'll always have one person from the last meeting in the next one. So that's not the same team every time, it's different, but it's what's feasible in the context. And if individual psychotherapy is advised, where possible, a team member will be selected to undertake this. So that's interesting in terms of the boundaries between individual work and family work, which I find myself doing quite a lot of that joint work. And my basic rule as an individual psychotherapist is I'm not going to bring in any of the detail from the individual sessions into the family sessions. If the person themselves wants to, that's fine, and I can comment if they're happy for me to. And so far, there hasn't been an issue that's arisen. I was quite skeptical of that at first and how it would work, but my experience has been it works very well. Tolerance of uncertainty. Principle number 6. This is the most difficult principle, but the most important. So other places, they think psychological continuity is the most difficult. But in Lapland, they would say this is the most difficult because it is difficult to tolerate uncertainty. Anxieties can be high in network members, but also in staff at a time of crisis. Other times it might feel more like we want to embrace the uncertainty because anxiety levels are not so high. But the main point is that every crisis is unique. And if every crisis is unique, then we don't know what's coming. And we don't know what the process is going to involve. And we have to be able to sort of adjust our position as practitioners to be able to be with that uncertainty, be with that not knowing. Tolerance to uncertainty is enhanced by creating a space in which everyone feels safe enough in a joint process and everyone feels heard. In the feedback that we have from family members, normally at the top of the list is they really listened, which kind of makes me wonder what's happening elsewhere for them not to have that experience in other services, but nevertheless. Working as a team, the teamwork helps in tolerating the uncertainty and the anxiety. And there are many other advantages to working as a team, which I don't have time to go into now. Reflective talk, which you can only do with a team member, which happens in each meeting, helps to tolerate the uncertainty. This is where we share thoughts and feelings transparently with the network present. And it might be necessary to meet daily, perhaps for 2 weeks in a more extreme crisis, in order for people to feel safe enough. Go slow to go fast. This is a Finnish saying. Premature conclusions and decisions are avoided. The final principle, dialogism. Well, the primary focus is on promoting dialogue as opposed to promoting change. So the team adapt and allow themselves to be changed. But what we find is if we're really in a dialogical process, then change happens naturally. We don't have to go looking for it. We aim to follow the themes and ways of speaking that family and network members are used to. The use of ordinary language is very important in this approach so that everyone's included. We hope that in dialogue, families and networks increase their sense of agency in their lives by discussing their issues and difficulties And in fact, the evidence from Lapland suggests that outcomes are better where the family feel they've done most of the work themselves. This is a creative way of working. So we're talking about new understandings building up in the area between participants in the dialogue. This is the uncertainty again. We're creating something new. Finding new words and a joint language together with the network for experiences which do not yet have words or language. And again, in the feedback from families, it's a common element is we were able to talk about things that we haven't been able to talk about before. That families feel safe enough to be able to take a chance to share what needs to be shared in this collective process. In the chapter, I've highlighted 3 additional principles, which aren't officially additional principles, but and to some extent they're all a feature of dialogue. But I feel they're particularly important, so they're worth kind of giving some space to. Equality, democracy, and respect. That's the first. All voices are treated equally in network meetings. They would say in the literature that the person expressing himself in a psychotic way may well be the one to have the answer at any particular moment in time to what is needed, for instance. And I think this reflects a strong ethic of democracy and Finnish culture generally. Transparency. Basic rule, professionals do not have conversations about the network in their absence. So all conversations happen with everyone present, apart from maybe just some sort of simple practical conversations that need to happen about organising meetings. But anything meaningful related to the process happens with everyone present. This is not only out of respect for the network, but also because the process is strengthened when conversations are contained within network meetings. And finally, process-oriented practice. Another famous Finnish saying, trust in the process. Every process is unique. If professionals and the family network are committed to the process, it's likely to be of benefit. That's been the experience in Lapland. That's certainly been my experience as a practitioner in the last 7 or 8 years. And the ability to bear intense emotions is usually an important aspect of these processes. And yeah, that makes sense to me. The movement that is possible is linked often to the emotion that is felt and expressed and shared and understood. So there's one more slide to share with you before I finish. But just to say, relating this to the chapter, that in the chapter in the book, I wrote a fictional account of work with the family at Brian's request to try and bring some of these principles to life. So there's a story of a 20-year-old man, John, and his family, and a team of 2 practitioners working with them. Some closing thoughts. A few additional points that just didn't quite fit into the other slides that are too important not to mention, I think. The first is, I mentioned R.D. Laing. In his writings in the 60s, he'd write a lot about, psychosis not need be all breakdown, it can also be breakthrough. He would say, psychosis may be the first time that somebody's been able to speak their truth in their life. And so that's been a very important guiding principle for me in my career, that a crisis is an opportunity for change. And the teams in Lapland would not disagree with that. And then if somebody is just starting to speak their truth, albeit in a non-understandable way, in a way that we might label symptoms, and we suppress that, then we miss the opportunity. If somebody's speaking their truth and we suppress that through medication, what a missed opportunity. Because symptoms, so-called symptoms, are resources. And if we over-medicate, we may lose this resource and lose the meaning. Open dialogue is not a strategy or a technique, but it's a way of thinking and relating to other people and the world. It's an approach based fundamentally in human relations. And finally, I've mentioned that open dialogue is spreading. It's developing now in as many as 30 countries. and will inevitably start to look different in different contexts. Now, this is a strength of dialogical approaches, but there's a question about the extent to which open dialogue needs to be coordinated internationally in order to help it grow and stay strong. Thank you for listening. Okay, so now I'm going to invite, we've got 6 panel members who I'm going to invite to turn their videos on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And there's one more person. Kirsten, I don't think you're in the panel. So if you could turn your video off. Thank you. So the 6 people that you can see now, in addition to me, have kindly offered to come. Morty, if you could turn your camera off, please. Thank you. Have kindly agreed to come and bring their perspectives. They come from a range of backgrounds and experiences, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves. So maybe while I've still got my camera on, could everyone just very briefly introduce themselves before I turn my camera off, and then you'll have the opportunity to share reflections on what you've heard.
I guess I could go first. My name is Roan Lee-Plunkett, and I'm here because I was invited. I'm very honored to be here. And I myself have experienced psychosis for half my life, and well, yeah, most of my life, and recently started using open dialogue as part of the approach to that.
Thank you.
Shall I go? I'm Karen Bulsara. I am based in the UK. I'm a carer in UK parlance, or a network member, as Open Dialogue states. I have lived experience of mental health crisis with my daughter, and also being not part of a network and not involved in her care. And so I've, since that happened, become an advocate for greater involvement of people such as myself, and hence found out about Open Dialogue and Nick, and I'm doing work in the NHS to try and rectify the problem.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Grainne Fadden. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've worked throughout my career trying to promote services for families, primarily using psychoeducational models, but also looking at involvement of peers and looking at the needs of family members. And I set up the Murdered Family Programme, where we did a lot of training on helping people to implement and develop family services across the board, really.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marjaana Karjalainen. I'm a nurse and a family therapist from Finland, from Helsinki, from the country Open Dialogue was born.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ludi Van Bouwel. I'm a psychiatrist working in Belgium. I was responsible for a ward in a big mental hospital, a ward for young people with psychosis. But I discovered Open Dialogue 20 years ago when Jaco Sekula came to Belgium. And for me, it was really an important turning point into my professional career. I can tell more about it a little bit later. I'm also at this moment the chair of ISPS, and I'm very, very happy that this book appeared in the ISPS book series. I'm very proud of it, that you took the book, ISPS book series, for this very important book. So.
Thank you, Ludi.
Hi, I'm Alf Gilham. I'm sort of a retired clinical psychologist. I worked most of my professional career in Scotland, in the Glasgow area, mainly in rehabilitation. It was called psychiatric rehabilitation, but then latterly in something called assertive outreach, which has, I think, a lot of similarities listening to the Open Dialogue presentation. There's a lot of familiarity there in terms of services. And I also trained psychoanalytically a long time ago. And I first heard about open dialogue when I went to the ISPS 50th anniversary conference in Madrid, and I sat in a group with Jaco and heard about it and was very interested, and I've since seen it grow, and I'm very pleased to see it starting to take root. So that's me.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to disappear now, and you're going to have just over 10 minutes, because we're running a little bit behind, just to share whatever you'd like to share in response to the presentation you've just heard. This is kind of like the reflections we might have in a network meeting, and after that I'll turn back on my camera and I'll have the opportunity to respond to you before we take some questions from others present. So please, over to you.
I don't mind starting. My feelings listening to Nick's presentation were that this is such a common sense approach that there is nothing you could argue with in it. It's just an example of good practice as it should be in services. And I was thinking when I was listening, my work was, you know, supposedly in psychoeducational approaches, but when I was listening to Nick, practically everything was the same as what I would have done, or we would have done in our service, or we would have trained people to do. So seeing the family as a resource, not blaming the family, meeting in the family home, seeing them for as long as needed. If an individual needs work, it's a member of the team who does it, using ordinary language, not discussing the person as if they're not there. And I suppose what I was struck with was that it's kind of sad that we've spent a lot of time having these different models of family work, whereas actually when you hear experienced people talk, we have these shared principles. If you've been around families for a long time, you know that this is what's helpful to them, you know that, you know, use their language, whatever. And it just seems such a shame that energy is spent on kind of arguing about different models or people not working together. I mean, I know of services where one group is doing systemic family therapy, they're not talking to the psychoeducational people, and open dialogue is starting. And I just wish we could all, you know, be lovely if we could all of us who want to work with families could share those resources, because actually there are so many people out there who want to work just with the individual that, and I can remember saying this years ago, that those of us who do work with families, if we could all work together, we would make this more widespread. We shouldn't be having battles together. So those were the things that struck me listening.
And yeah, I'd like to add on to the whole part about working together, because, and also the principle of openness. I was recently hospitalized, actually, and part of what was so confusing was that nobody was talking to each other, and I had a different medical professional in charge of me every day. And it actually added to the confusion of psychosis. And I just remember saying to the pharmacist, so are you guys in communication right now? Because it sure didn't feel like it. And I didn't say that bit, but, you know, are you communicating? And he's like, yeah. You know, but it's so confusing when you're there alone too. And you have to be accountable to your own health and to everyone else who is supposed to be in charge of it. So I wanted to add that bit.
Can I just, Roan, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure my daughter felt very similar when she was undergoing her mental health crisis. So many people saying the same thing to different people who didn't seem to acknowledge and listen. I just wanted to really pick up on the point that Nick mentioned about this erosion of community. I have always been very interested in mental health, but was never prepared for when it happened to me and my family. And reached out to services in England, National Health Services, expecting to meet like-minded people who would want to listen to our story and help us. And what happened instead was my daughter was taken off into a room on her own, and I was told to wait outside, and I wasn't listened to as her mother. That service happened in children's care and then in adult care, and I was astounded. This sense that you work with the patient, you don't need to involve anybody else, really I found inhumane and ridiculous, because she was unable to communicate effectively because she was in crisis, and there wasn't a sense of, okay, let's involve the other people in her life. It was shocking to me, and now I'm finding that open dialogue is such a no-brainer, and yet working with current services, I can see that we're having a problem in England even recognising that carers exist, but identifying them, acknowledging them, finding out who they are, inviting them to meetings, giving them information. It does not happen, and there is a real need for reform.
Yeah, that all sounds sort of achingly familiar to me as a psychologist when I was working. You know, I was used to sort of professionals coming and going with clients, with patients, with people, and there was no continuity at all, and it wasn't recognized as important. It was as if the stories that people told, it didn't matter who they were telling them to, and they would often have to tell them to people over and over again, which were traumatizing, and repeated the trauma to them. And so, to me, the way that the mental health services was set up where I was working were they were not able to hear. They weren't designed to hear people's stories. And I like the idea of what Nick said, you know, from Open Dialogue, that the family is seen as a resource. It's a resource, a very important resource that needs to be heard. Not just the family, but the whole, you know, the whole group around the family, but also that the patient, in inverted commas, the client is a resource, is a huge resource as well. But you know, the elephant in the room is that psychiatry as it's practiced at the moment, which is physical and biological, it doesn't see that. It finds it very hard to hear. And the thing I like about open dialogue, from what I've heard, is and understand, is it's an opportunity for people to start to hear. But my worry is how is that introduced to systems which are very, very stuck. That's a worry I have, you know, but I think, you know, watching it grow at the moment, it's very nice to see that. But there are problems ahead, and I'd like to, you know, to hear what people think about those and ways of overcoming them and in the future.
Maybe I can reflect on it, because as a psychiatrist, 10 years ago, I was working on a ward in a big hospital, and when Jaakko Sekula came, we wanted to start with an early intervention team, an outpatient early intervention team, because we saw that there were so many shortcomings in our work. Because the people were working with families and also on a very psychotherapeutic way, but we felt the shortcomings, and that's the reason why we started early intervention team. But when Jaakko Sekula came, he gave the seven principles of open dialogue, and even we were not trained for that open dialogue method, but we tried to use the 7 principles in our outpatient early intervention team. But I think it was possible because of the team members who were very well educated in family therapy and also in psychoanalysis. And they were accustomed to bear uncertainty. They were accustomed to speak in open way. They understood that symptoms, they needed, and those symptoms can have a meaning. So many things that we heard in open dialogue, we already used in our hospital, but it's a very big difference when you are working with the family and the person with the problem at home. But still I feel, and then I come back to your concern of, that we have to do a lot for our managers in our big hospitals to ask the money to educate our team members. Now at this moment we are working we try to work in such a way, but only two members have since only this year an education in open dialogue. Still we try to use the 7 principles, but we are not educated in open dialogue. That was also my question to Nick. Is it really necessary to follow this very intense training? It was one question to Nick, and my second question was, I think that it's logical that when you use open dialogue, and if it is impossible to let those person who has symptoms to let him at home, is then not a therapeutic community, for instance, like a Soteria house, not a big and a good alternative for the hospital? Because I think it's logical that when you use already the principles of open dialogue, and when people cannot stay at home, would it not be good that there will be organized more small homes, like, for instance, Soteria houses? And that's my question also. It's not a logical consequence of the open dialogue methods when you use it.
We have been using open dialogue in my team since 90s, and I can't say that we are doing it perfectly, but we are doing on the basis of open dialogue. And I think that if you do it the right way, you have to have the whole organization behind it. I mean, we have sometimes difficulties with the wards because they don't think that way, that hospitalization is short, and we want our patient out from there, and it's not always possible. And I think that the hardest thing in learning open dialogue is to drop your expertise and be a human, and bring your personality there, and be open and trust the dialogue. It's really hard, and people want to know things and know better than anybody else. So we have to grow to be in open dialogue.
Going back to your point, Ludi, about Soteria House and those kinds of services, I think in my experience, if the family get this kind of support, the person of concern, the person who's experiencing these difficulties, can often stay at home. I mean, one of the reasons people can't stay at home is because nobody has helped the family to know what to do or how to deal with crisis or what to do if certain things happen, or there's nobody to call. Whereas if you have a service like this, where people get instant help, where there's always somebody there, can see them every day, then it's much more likely that the person can stay at home and that you don't need these other kinds of resources. I mean, I worked in the Buckingham service in England for 11 years, and we had home-based care where we would be in people's homes every day. If there was an acute crisis, we would be there from 8 in the morning to 9 at night, whatever. And we had something like 4 hospitalizations a year. So it is possible. I mean, partly why people have to go to other resources is nobody has helped people to know what to do, or they're not there to support them. And the only other comment I was going to make is I think, you know, it's important not to be too negative, because I know people still have bad experiences. As you mentioned, Karen, of not being listened to as a family member, but actually there are a lot of people trying to be better. And I think overall the services have become more inclusive. If you take it in general, I know there are areas where things are still very bad, but there are also areas where things have improved a lot, where the families are welcomed into sessions. And in fact, last week we launched some guidance from the British Psychological Society, and one of the people there who was working in a service said the change they had made was whenever they send an appointment to somebody, they say, please bring somebody with you, bring a family member with you. We want to see somebody right from the start. And I thought that was just a wonderful, a simple thing, but actually giving such a positive message from the start that we know other people are important in your lives. We want to see them too. And I thought, you know, if we could just take on things like that, that would make such a difference really to people's experiences and then to outcomes.
Thank you for all those reflections. I'd love us to have much more time to listen to you all. Of course, all of you are participating in more of the panel sessions, so there will be time, and also some of the questions that come after I've responded to your reflections may be to you as well. So if you could keep your cameras on just while I respond, and I don't want to take too much for this. I mean, the main thing, I think the first few reflections I was hearing was sort of feeding back kind of, or echoing things that I'd said, which I can echo back about common sense, about there not being so much competition between different models. I come from a psychotherapy background. There's hundreds of therapies and so many factions and wars between them. And how can this be? You know, yes. In terms of what you were saying, Rowan, about nobody talking to each other, I'm reminded of a guy who always used to come to the early seminars we did on open dialogue, who said he'd seen 99 psychiatrists in his career as a mental health patient. You know, this speaks to the problem, I think. Yeah, not working with the family. I've heard that so many times, families wanting to be involved and not being able to. It's like, you know, we take some away, we fix them, we send them back. We fix them, we send them back. It's crazy. The family as a resource, and why does sort of mainstream psychiatry find it hard to hear this, as I think you were saying, Alf, and how is this introduced into systems that are very stuck? This is a big question, because one of the things that can happen to any relatively new approach is there's lots of early enthusiasm. It can be adopted to some extent in the system, but then because of the forces that be, it ends up being watered down and looking rather similar to what was there before. And how can we sort of protect and preserve this approach, as, you know, it does interface with the system and very different kind of fundamental basis in terms of how it's structured? It's a big question. The question of training, yeah, it's an important one. You know, pleased to hear about your experiences, Ludi, and of course, if there's teams that have a lot of training in family therapy, psychotherapy, they may well naturally take to this approach. And I'm not the one to say about who needs training and who doesn't, but I do think there's something quite particular about the trainings that we offer. Many different trainings, open dialogue trainings. So I'm not just speaking about the trainings that I'm involved in. And the processes involved in the dialogue, which do have some unique aspects. But, you know, if people are already highly trained, then maybe the training doesn't need to be so long. It's about revisiting, refining, re-experiencing, or experiencing something new. But I do think there's something to those processes, which I'll say more about in the workshop. Therapeutic communities, I was involved in trying to develop Soteria before open dialogue. And one of the reasons I moved more to open dialogue was I thought we have a better chance of getting this into the system. With Soteria, you need bricks and mortar, you need a house, you need £500,000 to get it open and staff it and all the rest. Whereas with open dialogue, okay, yes, there's an investment in training and some service development, but it's not quite the same. But I've always thought that if we could have more therapeutic communities as alternatives to hospital for people that need more than we can offer them in their homes, then that would be a very powerful kind of aspect to an open dialogue service. And dropping the expert, I love what you said, Marjaana, about, you know, people want to know things, you know, and we feel like we've done all this training, we want to know things, and people find it hard to drop. It's not actually that hard to drop, but the mentality and all the associations with all we've learned before, maybe it does take time. And that's one of the aspects of the training processes, the kind of letting go, if you like, releasing from habitual ways of being and responding. Thank you for those reflections. I want to invite anyone who would like to ask a question to myself or any of the panel now to raise their hand. You can also ask a question in the chat, in which case Brian will relay it to us, but you can also turn on your video and raise your hand, and then we can invite you to share your question directly.
Perhaps we should invite 1 or 2 people who've spoken on the chat already, or raised things on the chat. There's somebody, John Robinson, I think, was the first one. John, John Robinson would like to turn on your video and ask your question? I don't think you asked the question, but you said you wanted to speak. There you go. Good. Turn on off. You're muted, John. Okay.
I'm sorry. I feel like a rabbit caught in the headlights now. I'm sorry. I just wasn't sure how to participate, to interact with this. So I don't have a specific question at the moment.
Okay.
But I was to some extent responsible for encouraging a company, third sector company, to send people to training with Nick. And we've not been able to carry it through because although I think 5 or 6 people have been trained, 4 people have left, which only left 2. That's one of the problems of very small companies. But one of the things I can attest to is that the times when we used it had quite a significant sort of effect on people, including staff, including mental health staff from mental health teams, because they were participant to the network meeting. And that's what I wanted to just say. But I'm sorry, it's a jumble, and I'm not saying anything of great value here. So,
oh, thank you, John.
I wouldn't say that, John. Thank you for
Okay.
joining in.
Yeah,
It's good to.
There's a couple of questions. If I could pull 2 or 3 questions together in a way from the chat. There's questions asking about scheduling, about availability and avoiding burnout. How do staff get time off and things like that? Nick, the ideal of continuous psychological continuity and so on. I wonder if that's something that brings 2 or 3 questions up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks. I would say, well, the first part in terms of scheduling, as I've already said, I don't fully understand it, but they have flexibility in their schedules and their systems, and maybe that's part of the value of teamwork in order to be able to respond and get a team together in a short space of time. The question I can maybe speak more to is this question of burnout and resources. I think there's no doubt that when you hear the stories from Lapland that people have gone above and beyond the call of duty on many occasions in order to make this work. And then there's a question of how sustainable that is. I think there's also some stories of that in the book from advocates in the USA. And of course, many people are enthusiastic about this way of working, but we've also got our limits and we need to look after ourselves. So it seems that there's the energy for the initial phases, but then how to make that sustainable. That's an important question. But the other part to that I think, is that what I can say to myself is that there are times where I've worked, I don't work with families as often as I'd like to because I'm mostly involved in trainings, but there are times when I've met with, let's say, 3 families, 3 networks in a day, and I've come out with more energy than I went in with to the day with because of how meaningful these processes can be. And I think there is evidence that actually if we're more open in our work and we're more connecting on an emotional level, there's less burnout than if we're very boundaried, which is the opposite of what we're often told. So those are my initial thoughts about energy and resources and burnout. Thank you for the questions. I don't know if anyone wants to add to what I've said in that regard.
I'm scanning the chats. Just while I'm doing that, just make one comment that if you keep people out of hospital, you reduce costs, and then you can put more people in the community. That's just a quick comment. Rowan says, I think doctors, at least in the US, are more used to dealing with acute situations and not with an ongoing process. That's a sort of comment rather than a question, I think. I'll just read these out. A question here, what sort of duration of meeting is common? If someone's staying at home, but they become extremely agitated at 2 a.m. and the family or network can't handle it, what happens? Should we pause with that one? From Jessica Watson.
So that was sort of the how often are the meetings? I don't know, so how long? For how long?
It's two questions. What happens? How long is a meeting? And what happens if somebody's can't be contained at 2 o'clock in the morning by the network or the family?
Yeah, I mean, average length of meetings an hour and a half, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. In Lapland, they have resources to allow a nurse to stay overnight with a family if that would help them to avoid being in hospital, which is a resource that we often don't have in other places. So I suppose it's you know, where there is a possibility of that kind of support, it's often possible to get through the night and you can have a meeting the next day. Where not, it may well be that somebody would have to be admitted to hospital, but in Lapland, they're doing all they can to avoid that.
Okay.
Brian, Yasmin Ishak said she's able to respond to some of the burnout issues there on the chat.
Okay, good. Yasmin? I can't see everybody, so is Yasmin able to? There she is, yes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, just my experience of managing an open dialogue service in the NHS, which is stressful in itself. One of the things that we ensured we did from the beginning, because it is emotionally draining, the work, and I hear what Nick says, but it is still emotionally draining when you're opening yourself up to that authentic emotional connection, is that weekly supervision became a very important cornerstone of our work, where we had time as a team to sit together, to reflect together, to share whatever was happening for us, positively or in a challenging way. And it became a very precious space for us. And I would advocate that it's absolutely crucial that you have that space as a team to come together on a weekly basis to share what's happening. And often it's about the sharing of what's happening for you. It's not about sharing or fixing what's happening with the people you're working with. This is the space that we have for time to reflect ourselves. And often what we did is we brought in things that were impacting on our ability to be present at times. So that's the thing I would bring to this, and I think practitioners enjoyed the fact that it was emotionally demanding, but also recognised that they needed that space for themselves as well. The way I describe it is, when you're in a space where you're holding a space for people, you also need a space where you can be held at the same time, and to get that balance right. I think that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just, there's so many questions and comments on the chat. I'm not quite sure how to manage this in 2 or 3 minutes, but just to I don't know whether we can all, everybody can everybody else see the questions coming in? All the participants see the question. Yeah.
Brian, how about we take one more, and then we can check in with the chat in the breaks, and we can try to find a way of responding, sort of not right now because we take a break in 2 minutes, but in the course of the conference.
Okay.
Take one more now.
May I say something about this burnout question?
Go on, Marjaana.
If it's brief.
It's our experience is that professionals like to work this way, and once they have learned this, they wouldn't like to do it any other way. And And our experience is also that when there is a team of 3 people, they share also the anxiousness, and there's less burnout than before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
There are a couple of questions about getting people out of hospital, which are obviously complex questions for someone who's been there most of his adult life. Mm-hmm. And a carer to a sibling in another, Linda says, a carer to a sibling in a secure forensic hospital. How do I introduce or encourage open dialogue? Can I just hold those questions? Because I think that Jaakko Seikkilä may want to mention these in his talk tomorrow. Because he talks in the book, I think in his chapter, he talks about having worked with families where a relative has been in hospital for years, and how important the contact with the families was, and how issues that had provoked the crisis were being addressed 20 years later. So I don't think we can answer the questions, but just say how important they are in a way to be able to think about them.
But we will make a note of all the questions in the chat, and we will try to find a way of responding to them.
Yeah.
We have to go to a break now. So I'd just like to thank the panel for this first session and for your contributions to it.